The sea has always carried secrets. Waves rise and fall, but whispers remain beneath their song. For centuries, sailors spoke of voices hidden in the tide. They said storms were not born of chance, but of memory. The ocean remembers everything, even what we forget. On quiet nights, fishermen heard the hum of unseen choirs. When thunder rolled, they felt the heartbeat of a god. This is not just a story of rain and wind. It is the tale of an endless storm that never sleeps. A storm born not of fury, but of longing unspoken. They call it the throne of Poseidon. Legends say it waits deep under coral and shadow, a throne that listens even when no one kneels. And when silence lingers too long, the sea begins to cry. That cry becomes a storm, a voice across the horizon. A kingdom once heard it, in a time long forgotten. Their ships stilled, their harbors fell quiet, their eyes turned seaward. And in the stillness, they felt a truth beyond fear. The sea was not their enemy, but their mirror. Tonight, let us step into the storm and hear what it remembers. The kingdom rested on a gentle curve of the sea. Its shores were long, lined with white sand and broken shells. Fishermen's huts stood in clusters, close enough to share firelight. Boats swayed quietly at the edge of the harbor, tethered to wooden posts. The people here lived by the rhythm of waves and wind. Every dawn, sails unfurled like wings, seeking the gift of the tide. Nets dropped, voices called, gulls circled overhead in hungry flocks. The sea was both neighbor and ruler, both friend and master. Children learned to swim before they learned to read words. Elders taught them stories, carved deep like lines in the sand. They spoke of the ocean as a being, patient yet watchful. It fed them, carried their trade, and guarded their borders. But all knew it could change its mood in a breath. Storms could rise without warning, darkening skies like spilled ink. Even so, the people trusted the sea's return to calm. They knew its voice, its cadence, its unspoken language. The kingdom thrived in this fragile balance of faith. Markets grew busy with fish, pearls, and salt. Merchants traveled across the waters, carrying spices and stories. Songs of the sea echoed in every alley, soft and eternal. To outsiders, this place seemed simple, untouched by time. But those who lived here knew its heartbeat intimately. Each tide was a message, each wave a reminder. The sea was never just water, it was memory itself. The king of the land often stood on the cliffs. He gazed outward, his crown shining against the horizon. He ruled the earth, but the sea bowed to no crown. Even kings must listen when the tide speaks. And the tide always spoke, though few could truly hear it. Seers claimed that the sea answered questions unspoken. They said the horizon was a veil between worlds. The fishermen believed this too, though in humbler ways. They believed the ocean loved them as they loved it. Every feast began with prayers offered to the waves. Children dropped flowers into the tide, asking for safe journeys. Mothers whispered names of their husbands to the surf. The sound carried, and they believed Poseidon listened. In this kingdom, the sea was not distant or feared. It was family, woven into every breath and every story. Yet beneath this devotion lay quiet caution. Elders warned of changes in the water's song. They told tales of tempests that lingered longer than memory. They spoke of a throne hidden beneath coral and pearl, a throne no mortal must disturb, lest storms never end. Young ones listened wide-eyed, half afraid, half enchanted. But as the years passed, the tales became little more than whispers. Most laughed gently, saying storms were only storms. Yet the sea has patience, more patience than men. And sometimes it waits for the moment when silence grows deep. On the surface, the kingdom thrived, untouched, unbroken. But beneath, the tide remembered what people had forgotten. It carried stories in its currents, secrets in its depths. The calm before the storm is often the most beautiful. That calm now stretched across the kingdom, golden and endless. Fishermen hauled nets heavy with shimmering scales. Children ran along the shore, chasing the foam of waves. Merchants prepared their ships, eager for distant markets. The sky was clear, the horizon kind and open. Yet hidden within that openness, something stirred. A silence lingered between the crash of waves. A pause too long, like a breath withheld. The sea, faithful and familiar, seemed to be waiting. Waiting for eyes to notice, for ears to listen. The kingdom did not yet understand what it meant. They did not yet hear the storm calling from afar. But the first chapter of their legend had already begun. The first whispers began with the tide. Fishermen noticed the waves arriving out of rhythm. They spoke in hushed tones, uneasy beneath the clear sky. The sea did not move, as it always had before. Currents twisted strangely, bending nets in odd directions. Boats drifted farther from shore, pulled by unseen hands. Even gulls circled nervously, wings restless above the water. Old men nodded, saying the sea was speaking again. Its language was not thunder yet, but something softer. The hush of foam, the sigh of retreating surf. Children played and noticed nothing, but mothers grew wary. They whispered among themselves, eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind shifted often, turning without warning or cause. Banners above the harbor snapped in sudden bursts. Merchants frowned, their cargo still waiting to be shipped. The silence of the harbor grew heavier each day. At night, the sea hummed like a voice half hidden. Some swore they heard names carried in the tide. Others said the water glowed faintly beneath the moon. The elders remembered what the stories had warned. They spoke of signs before this endless storm arrived. Not rage at first, but gentle, steady murmurs. Warnings carried in foam, disguised as common waves. Do not forget, they said. The sea has memory. Few listened closely, for the days seemed too bright. Fishermen filled their baskets, though with greater effort. The bounty came, but never without strange resistance. Some fish slipped free, vanishing into darker waters. Nets tangled more often, as if caught by unseen fingers. The whispers of the tide grew louder each night. Boats rocked harder in calm seas, ropes strained. The harbor creaked like a ship in restless sleep. The seers were summoned, robes trailing across stone steps. They stood at the edge of the water, eyes closed. They listened not with ears, but with their breath. One by one, their faces grew pale and troubled. The youngest whispered of voices in the deep. The eldest said nothing, only bowed to the waves. The people grew uneasy, though no storm yet came. Children asked why the sea was louder at night. Mothers hushed them, but their own gazes lingered long. The king was told of shifting winds and signs. He listened, but doubt clouded his noble brow. Storms are storms, he said, and pass as they arrive. Yet even he felt the strangeness when standing by cliffs. The horizon shimmered as though holding back a secret. The waves rose and fell, but never as before. Each crest seemed to breathe. Each trough seemed to sigh. The whispers became part of every household tale. Neighbors asked each other what they had heard at night. Some claimed dreams filled with echoes of the sea. Others said they woke to find sand wet on windows. The whispers were no longer whispers, but a chorus. Still, no lightning flashed. No thunder cracked the sky. Instead, there was waiting, heavy and unbroken. The people prayed to Poseidon in morning offerings. Flowers floated away, carried swiftly as though claimed. Yet unease did not leave their hearts or their eyes. They wondered if prayers alone could calm the water. The tide answered only with more restless turning. One night, a fisherman awoke to silence too deep. He stepped outside and saw the stars blurred by mist. The sea was calm, but its calm felt unnatural. No gull called, no wind stirred, no wave broke. It was as though the world had paused in breath. He whispered to himself, "The sea remembers." And in that silence, the first fear truly began. The storm did not come with warning. It rose upon the horizon like a dark crown of clouds. At first it was distant, too far to cause worry. But day after day, it did not fade or drift. The shape remained, fixed against the curve of the sea. Waves beneath it churned, restless, though no ships dared approach. Fishermen pointed to it with uneasy silence. Children stopped their games to stare at its shadow. It was unlike storms they had known before. No lightning struck, no rain reached the land. It stayed, unmoving, a circle of fury trapped in place. The people called it the endless storm. The harbor grew quieter as days turned into weeks. Merchants canceled voyages, fearing cursed waters ahead. Boats tied fast, their sails bound tightly against the masts. The sea beyond the horizon belonged no longer to men. It belonged to something greater, unseen, waiting. The king stood upon the cliffs each morning, his eyes narrowed, his heart heavy with silent questions. What storm forgets to move, to end to pass away? He asked his seers, but their voices faltered. They spoke of balance broken, of a throne disturbed. Yet none dared say whose hand had caused this unrest. The storm seemed alive, a watcher more than a force. At night, flashes lit its heart like silent lanterns. No thunder followed, only the hiss of distant rain. Some claimed they heard voices carried across the wind. Others dreamed of the sea pulling them downward in sleep. The kingdom began to wither without the ocean's path. Trade ships could not sail, and markets thinned each week. Salted fish stores dwindled, and hunger crept into homes. The silence of empty nets weighed heavier than storms. Still, the endless storm remained, patient, unbroken. The people asked if Poseidon himself had risen in anger. Priests poured offerings into the water, prayers on their lips. Flowers sank quickly, vanishing into the dark tide. Yet no answer came, only the endless circling clouds. Children awoke crying, saying they dreamed of waves speaking. They told of a throne of coral rising from the sea. Mothers hushed them, though fear shone in their eyes. The whispers from the tide had grown into visions, and now the visions became the storm's shadow. The king walked through the harbor one evening. He saw fishermen mending nets they would not cast. He saw merchants counting goods they could not trade. He saw children staring at the horizon in silence. The storm had entered their hearts as much as the sky. It was not simply weather, but presence. The people felt watched, judged, measured by something vast. Each day without sailing was a wound to the kingdom. Each night of silence pressed heavier on their dreams. The elders remembered words they had long left unspoken. They whispered again of Poseidon's throne beneath the sea. A throne no hand must touch, no mortal must disturb. Had someone dared, or had time itself awakened it? The endless storm was not mere nature, they knew. It was memory, a voice, a demand unanswered. Still the horizon burned with unending clouds. Still the waters shifted restlessly beneath its crown. The kingdom waited, though they did not know for what. And in that waiting, fear became part of every breath. The storm would not end, nor would it come closer. It lingered, endless, like a question without reply. The people watched. The sea held its silence, and the legend of the endless storm began to live. Fear spread through the kingdom like a shadow at dusk. At first, it was quiet, unspoken, a heaviness in the air. Mothers clutched their children when the wind shifted suddenly. Fishermen lingered on shore, repairing nets they did not cast. The harbor, once alive with sails, grew eerily still. Empty boats bobbed in place, tied like animals in cages. The market stalls felt hollow without the scent of fresh catch. Merchants paced restlessly, counting goods that could not be sold. Trade routes closed, and the sea no longer gave passage. Each morning, the endless storm loomed unchanged on the horizon. Its black crown of clouds became part of the sky itself. The people whispered that Poseidon's anger was no longer rumor. Children who once laughed by the shore grew silent. They stared at the sea with eyes far older than their years. Some said they dreamed of waves reaching out like hands. Others claimed the tide carried voices calling their names. The priests prayed louder, offering oil, flowers, and pearls. The sea accepted their gifts, but answered only with silence. The silence was heavier than thunder, sharper than lightning. The king gathered his council in the great hall. Their voices clashed, some demanding action, others urging patience. One elder warned, "Fear will break us before the storm does." But fear already seeped into every home, every dream. The fishermen muttered that the sea's song had changed. It no longer sang with promise, only with warning. At night, families heard the waves pound louder than before. The rhythm was wrong, like a heartbeat out of tune. People closed shutters, though no rain touched the land. The endless storm watched from afar, silent but suffocating. Some believed it was a wall, holding something back. Others thought it was a veil, hiding gods in council. The youngest feared it was a mouth, waiting to devour. Whatever it was, it lived now in every thought. The kingdom's spirit bent under the weight of unseen eyes. The streets grew quieter, laughter faded from the taverns. No songs of the sea were sung in the square. The lullabies of fishermen's wives became low and trembling. Food grew scarce as the ocean refused its bounty. The people turned to the land, but harvests were thin. The sea had always been their partner. Now it withheld. Without its gifts, the kingdom's heart began to hollow. The storm became a shadow inside their daily prayers. Even those who mocked legends now spoke Poseidon's name softly. The old storytellers remembered ancient warnings. They said when a storm refused to move, it was no storm. It was a voice, a demand, a memory rising. Still, the king stood tall before his people. He promised the gods would be appeased, the sea calmed. Yet his eyes lingered on the horizon too long. He too felt the storm's gaze pressing into his soul. Fear tightened its grip as days became weeks. The endless storm did not fade, nor grow, nor move. It was eternal, as though carved into the sky itself. And in that eternity, the people's hope began to thin. They wondered if the sea they loved would ever return, or if they had lost it forever to the throne of Poseidon. The king did not sleep easily as the storm lingered. Every night he walked the balcony of his tower in silence. The sky above was clear, but the horizon never changed. The endless storm waited, vast, unblinking, patient as eternity. Advisors pressed him with plans, but none gave him peace. Some demanded warships be built to break the waves. Others urged more offerings, richer and heavier each day. The king heard their voices, but trusted neither path. For he too had heard the whispers of the tide. Not all storms can be fought with sails and steel. Not all gods are swayed by jewels and wine. One evening, a stranger came to the gates of the palace. Her cloak was soaked with sea spray, though no rain fell. Her eyes held the deep color of midnight currents. She bowed not in fear, but with quiet certainty. "I am Nerina," she said, voice low as a tide. "The storm does not rise against you, but calls you." The council scoffed, calling her a dreamer and liar. But the king felt the weight of truth in her tone. He asked her what she meant, and she spoke again. "The throne of Poseidon waits for one who will listen. It is not anger that holds the sea, but memory." The words sank into him like anchors into sand. For he too had felt the storm watching, not raging. The priests warned against her, saying she was cursed. But the king commanded her to speak in full. She told of ancient songs carried by waves in secret. Songs older than kingdoms, older than the stars themselves. She said Poseidon's throne was not made of gold or stone. It was made of silence, longing, and the sea's breath. Only those who dared enter the heart of the storm could hear. Only those who listened without fear would understand. The court mocked her, but the king's heart stirred. He remembered the night his father told him of the sea, that the ocean does not rage without reason, that every storm is a question, not an answer. Perhaps this was the question of his reign. Perhaps this was the test the sea had placed before him. He dismissed his court and kept Nerina by his side. Together, they walked the palace gardens in the dark. The fountains whispered like fragments of a forgotten tide. "Why have you come now?" he asked her. "Because the storm no longer waits," she replied simply. "It grows heavier with each silence unbroken. If no one answers, the sea itself will fade." Her words chilled him more than thunder ever could. A world without the sea was no world at all. He promised to listen, though he did not yet know how. Nerina smiled faintly, as though hearing the ocean sigh. "The sea will guide you when you are ready," she said. The king felt both burden and clarity in her presence. For the first time in weeks, he dreamed without fear. In his dream, he stood before a throne of waves. It rose from the deep, carved of water and wind. No crown sat upon it, only silence, heavy and endless. From that silence, he heard his own name echo. When he woke, he knew what must be done. He would go into the storm himself, not with ships of war, not with treasures, but with listening. For only in silence could the throne of Poseidon be heard. The dawn that followed was quiet, almost too quiet for comfort. The people gathered at the shore, waiting for the king's command. Rumors spread that he would challenge the sea with fire. Others whispered he would abandon the coast and flee inland. Instead, the king walked alone to the harbor with Nerina. He carried no crown, no sword, no jeweled cloak of rule. Only a simple robe, pale as foam, trailed behind his steps. The silence of the crowd pressed upon him like heavy sails. Every gaze asked a question he had no words to answer. He turned to Nerina, who walked steady, her eyes on the tide. The sea was calm near the sand, but restless beyond. The endless storm still burned on the horizon, vast and unmoving. Its clouds curled like thrones of smoke, its lightning silent as thought. Nerina lifted her hand, palm open, as if greeting it. "The sea waits for you," she said, her voice like driftwood. The king stepped into the shallows, cool water licking his feet. He did not flinch, though the crowd gasped behind him. Salt air thickened, wrapping around him like a cloak unseen. Each step forward felt like crossing from one world into another. The waves did not resist him, nor pull him under. Instead, they rose and fell in rhythm, as if guiding. The crowd murmured prayers, voices trembling against the silence. Some begged him to return, to leave the sea alone. But his heart had already chosen the path forward. Nerina followed until the tide brushed her waist, then stopped. "You go on alone," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "Beyond this point, the sea speaks only to you." The king nodded, though fear tightened inside his chest. The water deepened quickly, but he did not sink. A path of foam formed, stretching toward the black horizon. The people on shore fell silent, watching with wide, tearful eyes. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The king's steps carried him farther from the shore's embrace. Seabirds circled high, their cries strange, sharp, and echoing. The storm loomed closer, its wall of clouds unbroken. He could feel the air shift, charged yet strangely calm. Every breath tasted of salt and secrets buried deep. The sea spoke not with thunder, but with memory. He saw flashes within the waves, faces, voices, fragments of song, ancient mariners with weathered hands reaching toward the horizon, children laughing on shores long swallowed by rising tides, a queen offering pearls into the foam, her eyes weeping. Every vision was a thread tied to the throne awaiting him. The king realized the storm was not made of rage. It was woven from countless moments, lives, and prayers. The sea remembered everything, even what the world had lost. And now it demanded someone listen before silence consumed it. He pressed on, though his chest ached with the weight of memory. The storm's wall opened like a curtain of rainless mist. Within lay a stillness so vast, it swallowed all sound. Here, at last, was the heart of the endless storm. A circle of calm, glowing faintly with silver light. And in its center, rising like breath, was the throne. It was no throne of stone, nor carved with human hands. It shimmered, shaped of water and air, ever shifting, ever living. The king fell to his knees, not in fear, but awe. He felt the sea's gaze upon him, heavy yet tender. A silence stretched, vast and endless, waiting to be broken. The king closed his eyes and whispered, "I am listening." And in that moment, the throne of Poseidon stirred. The sea answered not with thunder, but with breath. A low hum rose from the depths, steady as a heartbeat. The throne shimmered, its form bending like water in moonlight. The king felt the sound travel through his bones like tide. It was not a voice, yet it spoke without words. Images bloomed in his mind, painted by currents unseen. He saw temples carved into cliffs, their altars drowning in waves. He saw sailors guiding stars that had long since burned away. He saw children building castles on shores now lost to time. The sea remembered all, carrying them in silence everlasting. The king whispered softly, "Why do you call to me?" The hum deepened, swelling until it filled the storm's heart. The air thickened, as though listening for his very breath. And then, within the shifting throne, a figure appeared. It was not Poseidon in crown or fury of storm. It was the shape of water itself, calm and immense. Eyes formed of whirlpools, hands shaped of flowing streams. The figure raised no weapon, only silence wrapped in power. The king bowed his head, waiting for its judgment to fall. Instead, the figure reached forth, touching his chest lightly. His heart surged, not with pain, but with memory unspoken. He felt his father's laughter by the shore as a boy. He felt his mother's lullaby carried in the hush of tides. He felt the kingdom's trust, their eyes turned always seaward. The sea had given them life, and they had forgotten. The figure's voice came at last, like waves against stone. Not anger, but remembrance. Not wrath, but longing. The king trembled, his body bowed by the truth of it. The endless storm was not a curse, but a plea. The throne called not for blood, nor gold, nor conquest, It called for listening, for the honoring of forgotten bonds. The king spoke, though his voice shook like sails in wind. "Tell me what must be done, and I will serve." The figure's eyes swirled with stars drowned in oceans past. "You must become the tide that listens and returns. Carry the sea's memory back to those who forgot." The king felt the command settle like salt into his skin, his veins filled with the sound of crashing waves unbroken. His breath became the rhythm of tides eternal. The throne dissolved, water flowing back into the storm. The figure faded, but its voice lingered within his heart. "You are not ruler of the sea, but its keeper. You are not master of storms, but listener of silence." The king bowed low, letting the sea wash through him. When he rose, the circle of calm rippled outward. The endless storm trembled, its crown of clouds splitting apart. Lightning flashed, not in anger, but like laughter of sky. The sea roared, not with fury, but with release long held. On the shore, the people gasped as the horizon shifted. The black wall of clouds began to thin, breaking into blue. The air lightened, the heavy silence lifting from their chests. They fell to their knees, praising gods they did not see. But Nerina smiled, for she knew the truth behind the veil. The king returned not as conqueror, but as servant of tide. His eyes carried the stillness of the throne within them. His hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of memory. The endless storm did not vanish, but it had listened. It would return, not as punishment, but as reminder. For the sea is not owned, not tamed, not forgotten. And those who live by it must always remember its song. The king stepped from the surf, his robe clinging with salt. The people reached for him, their voices a wave of relief. But he lifted his hand, silencing them with gentle calm. "The sea has spoken," he said, voice steady as the tide. "And we must listen, for it remembers what we do not." The kingdom awoke to a world touched by change. The sea that had once brooded now breathed with gentle rhythm. Fishermen who had abandoned their boats returned to the shore. The tide lapped against the wood as though in welcome. They cast their nets, trembling with both hope and fear. When they pulled them in, the nets were heavy with silver. The ocean had returned its gift, abundant and forgiving. Children ran across the beach, their laughter bright against the waves. Merchants reopened stalls, laying out fish, shells, and woven ropes. The marketplace hummed again with the pulse of life. Yet beneath the joy, there lingered an unspoken awe. The endless storm still hovered at the edge of sight. Its crown of clouds was broken, but not gone. It remained a reminder that the sea did not forget. The king walked among his people, robes damp with salt. They bowed low, but he raised them gently with his hands. "No crown is heavier than the trust of the sea," he said. His words spread quickly, repeated in every home and harbor. Priests, once fearful, now sang hymns of gratitude. But their songs were quieter, filled with reverence, not demand. They understood the sea was not to be commanded. It was to be honored, as kin, as keeper of memory. Nerina stood beside the king, her eyes on the horizon. She spoke little, but her silence carried wisdom deeper than words. The people grew curious of her, whispering she was chosen. Some said she was a daughter of the tide itself. Others believed she was merely a guide, nothing more. The king alone knew her truth was greater than titles, for she had shown him the path to listen. Without her, the throne would have remained a silence unbroken. Together, they began to reshape the kingdom's ways. Offerings were no longer jewels or gold cast into the surf. Instead, they became songs, stories, and acts of care. Children were taught to speak to the tide with respect. Sailors sang not only for safe passage, but in gratitude. Farmers poured the first grain of harvest into the sea, not as payment, but as remembrance of the bond shared. The sea gave, and so too must the people give. The balance was fragile, yet it was true. As months passed, peace returned to the land. The storm at the horizon remained, yet it no longer threatened. It was like a watchful guardian, stern but patient. On nights of full moon, its clouds glowed faintly silver. Some said that was Poseidon's throne, shimmering with approval. The king often stood at the cliffs, looking seaward. He heard whispers not of anger, but of memory. Each whisper reminded him of the vow he had made: to listen, to serve, to remember what the sea remembers. His dreams were no longer haunted by silence. Instead, they carried songs of tides and voices of old. The people too began to dream, their fear replaced with wonder. They spoke of the sea as teacher, not as master. They built shrines not of marble, but of driftwood and shells. Simple places where anyone could sit and listen. The kingdom learned that listening was harder than commanding. But in listening, they discovered truths that words had hidden. The endless storm had given them more than fear. It had given them a chance to begin anew, a chance to remember the sea not as enemy, but mirror. And in that reflection, they saw themselves more clearly. The king knew their journey was not complete. The storm remained, patient, eternal, waiting for the next silence. But for now, the kingdom was at peace with the tide. And peace, like the sea, was vast, fragile, and endless. The seasons turned, and the kingdom grew strong once more. Ships ventured farther, their sails bold against the horizon. The sea greeted them with calm, yet always with weight. For every voyage carried memory, as the sea had taught. Merchants returned with treasures, spices, and stories of distant lands. But always they offered first their thanks to the tide. No sailor left without a whisper to the waves, and no sailor returned without bowing to the shore. The king watched this change with quiet pride. It was not wealth that pleased him, but reverence. The people had grown wiser, though wisdom was fragile. For men often forget the lessons that pain teaches. And joy, like calm waters, tempts hearts into carelessness. Nerina often warned him of this truth. The sea forgives, but it does not forget, she said. Her eyes always lingered on the faint storm at sea. The endless storm still breathed, silent yet eternal. Some nights, fishermen swore they heard voices in the surf. Laughter, songs, or whispers in languages they did not know. They spoke of drowned cities or gods roaming unseen. The king did not dismiss these tales as madness, for he too heard echoes in his dreams. The throne's voice, gentle but firm, never left him. Remember, remember, do not let silence fall again. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a new ship appeared, its sails black as night. It bore no crest, no flag of kingdom or kin. The harbor stilled, unease rippling through the people. The vessel anchored, silent as a shadow cast wide. From it came figures cloaked in garments of salt. Their eyes gleamed like pearls, pale and unblinking. They spoke in voices low, as if carried by tide. "We come from where the storm never sleeps," they said. The king welcomed them, though caution weighed his heart. They bowed not to him, but to the sea behind him. Their leader stepped forth, bearing a staff of coral. It pulsed faintly, as though alive with the ocean's breath. "We are the Watchers," he declared, voice rolling like surf. "Guardians of the throne, witnesses of its endless call." The court murmured, fear mingling with awe. for never before had strangers spoken of the throne aloud. The king studied them, his heart stirred by memory. "Why have you come to my shore?" he asked. The watcher's gaze deepened, unblinking as a still tide. "Because the sea remembers, but men always forget." He raised his staff, and the air thickened like mist. Visions poured forth, not of war, but of warning. Cities drowned by arrogance, altars swallowed by silence. Kingdoms that ignored the sea until it rose unyielding. The court gasped, many falling to their knees. The visions faded, leaving only the watcher's words. "The storm is not ended. It only waits." Nerina's breath caught, her eyes wide with knowing. She turned to the king, whispering, "This is the test." The watcher stepped closer, lowering his staff with care. "You sit where Poseidon sat, but you are not he. You keep memory, but memory fades unless spoken." The king felt the weight of silence return. Not the storm's silence, but man's forgetting heart. He bowed his head, voice steady as the tide. "Then we will speak. We will remember." The watchers nodded, their faces unreadable as waves. For now, the sea listens. But do not let silence grow. With that, they turned and vanished into mist. The black-sailed ship drifted away, dissolving into a horizon. The people stood shaken, but the king's resolve grew firm. The endless storm had not ended, only paused. Its throne was not a gift, but a promise that demanded vigilance, humility, and memory. And memory, he knew, was the hardest burden of all. The days that followed were filled with whispers of the watchers. Some feared them, calling them omens of doom yet to come. Others revered them, seeing guardians sent by the sea itself. The king heard both voices, but listened most to silence. Silence, he had learned, held the truest weight of all. Nerina watched him carefully, her gaze steady as tide. "You are troubled," she said one night by the cliffs. The moon hung low, silver spilling across the restless sea. "Yes," he admitted, "for memory is heavier than crown or sword." She touched the water, letting ripples spread into infinity. Memory is a gift when shared, a curse when kept. Her words lingered with him long after she walked away. The king began to gather his people in circles, not in temples of marble, but in open air by shore. There they told stories of storms, voyages, and the sea. Children spoke of shells and laughter, elders of floods and loss. Each tale was offered like a stone to the growing pile, a cairn of memory built not by one, but all. The king added his own, of the throne's silent song. The people listened, wide-eyed, for no king had spoken thus. A ruler sharing weakness was rare, but it bound them close. The sea listened too, its waves steady with approval. The endless storm remained at horizon, but no longer menacing. It pulsed faintly, as if nodding to each story told. Yet the watcher's warning weighed heavily in his mind. The sea remembers, but men always forget. He feared what might happen when memory grew dim again. So he ordered no monuments, no towers of stone or gold. Instead, he decreed the building of halls for voices. Halls where songs, stories, and histories would live forever. Every voyage would be recorded, every storm remembered. The people called them tide halls, keepers of the ocean's truth. They were simple, yet filled with echoes of countless lives. Travelers carried these tales to faraway harbors and kingdoms. Soon, other lands spoke of the sea as living kin. The kingdom became not richest, but wisest among nations. Its strength lay not in arms, but in listening. Still, Nerina reminded him, wisdom can be forgotten in ease. And ease came with abundance, with nets heavy and barns full. Children grew, knowing calm seas more than storms. Some began to doubt the need for endless remembrance. They mocked offerings, calling them superstition of old days. The king felt the shift like a chill in his bones. He walked among them, listening. But the silence returned. It was not the silence of the sea this time. It was the silence of people who did not listen. One night, as he slept, the storm called to him, not with anger, but with a sorrow that shook his heart. He dreamed of waves swallowing the tide halls one by one. He dreamed of voices drowned by forgetfulness deeper than sea. He woke, gasping, with salt upon his lips. Nerina stood by his side, her face pale with knowing. "You felt it too," she whispered. He nodded, his hands trembling like sails in heavy wind. "The sea weeps, for we are beginning to forget again." The endless storm glowed faintly on the horizon, a reminder. It had not come closer, but it had not gone. It was waiting, patient, eternal, listening to silence grow. The king knew then that memory must live beyond men. It must be woven into the very rhythm of life, not just told in stories, but sung in every heartbeat. He rose with resolve, the throne's voice echoing in his chest. If silence is death, then remembrance must be eternal song. And so, he prepared to carve memory into time itself. The days that followed were filled with whispers of the watchers. Some feared them, calling them omens of doom yet to come. Others revered them, seeing guardians sent by the sea itself. The king heard both voices, but listened most to silence. Silence, he had learned, held the truest weight of all. Nerina watched him carefully, her gaze steady as tide. "You are troubled," she said one night by the cliffs. The moon hung low, silver spilling across the restless sea. "Yes," he admitted, "for memory is heavier than crown or sword." She touched the water, letting ripples spread into infinity. Memory is a gift when shared, a curse when kept. Her words lingered with him long after she walked away. The king began to gather his people in circles, not in temples of marble, but in open air by shore. There they told stories of storms, voyages, and the sea. Children spoke of shells and laughter, elders of floods and loss. Each tale was offered like a stone to the growing pile, a cairn of memory, built not by one but all. The king added his own, of the throne's silent song. The people listened, wide-eyed, for no king had spoken thus. A ruler sharing weakness was rare, but it bound them close. The sea listened too, its waves steady with approval. The endless storm remained at horizon, but no longer menacing. It pulsed faintly, as if nodding to each story told. Yet the watcher's warning weighed heavily in his mind. The sea remembers, but men always forget. He feared what might happen when memory grew dim again. So he ordered no monuments, no towers of stone or gold. Instead, he decreed the building of halls for voices, halls where songs, stories, and histories would live forever. Every voyage would be recorded, every storm remembered. The people called them tide halls, keepers of the ocean's truth. They were simple, yet filled with echoes of countless lives. Travelers carried these tales to faraway harbors and kingdoms. Soon, other lands spoke of the sea as living kin. The kingdom became not richest, but wisest among nations. Its strength lay not in arms, but in listening. Still, Nerina reminded him, wisdom can be forgotten in ease. And ease came with abundance, with nets heavy and barns full. Children grew, knowing calm seas more than storms. Some began to doubt the need for endless remembrance. They mocked offerings, calling them superstition of old days. The king felt the shift like a chill in his bones. He walked among them, listening, but the silence returned. It was not the silence of the sea this time. It was the silence of people who did not listen. One night, as he slept, the storm called to him, not with anger, but with a sorrow that shook his heart. He dreamed of waves swallowing the tide halls one by one. He dreamed of voices drowned by forgetfulness, deeper than sea. He woke, gasping, with salt upon his lips. Nerina stood by his side, her face pale with knowing. "You felt it too," she whispered. He nodded, his hands trembling like sails in heavy wind. "The sea weeps, for we are beginning to forget again." The endless storm glowed faintly on the horizon, a reminder. It had not come closer, but it had not gone. It was waiting, patient, eternal, listening to silence grow. The king knew then that memory must live beyond men. It must be woven into the very rhythm of life, not just told in stories, but sung in every heartbeat. He rose with resolve, the throne's voice echoing in his chest. If silence is death, then remembrance must be eternal song. And so, he prepared to carve memory into time itself.